Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Cool. Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar today, titled Beyond HR, Using Predictive and Prescriptive Analytics to Impact Business Goals. With us today is Jennifer Burnett, Principal Consultant, Talent Analytics at Cornerstone onDemand. Feel free to ask questions throughout. I'll be monitoring them and asking them to Jennifer at the end. There'll also be polls at certain points of the webinar, so feel free to vote. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jake. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This topic of predictive and prescriptive analytics is one that seems to be very top of mind for most HR leaders and business executives as well. And so really our goal today is to talk about some of the different levels of analytics and some of the challenges that you may be facing. So we really would hope that you walk away today with some practical and actionable takeaways that you're able to apply to the journey that you are on today in terms of getting the most out of talent analytics in your organization. Before we start, I did want to just as a caveat mention Cornerstone is a publicly traded company. There may be things that we talk about today that are more future oriented, and of course those may or may not actually take place, and so of course anything that you would like to learn more about Cornerstone, we would encourage you to look at what we offer today and not necessarily what we will be working towards in the future. As I mentioned, of course, data analytics is top of mind. It definitely is top of mind for CEOs. This is some information from a recent survey from PwC where CEOs said that data analytics are extremely important to them, and they think that it provides insights into what their stakeholders want. And that's really any data analytics across their whole organization. At the same time, their talent strategies are also a high priority, and they understand that having a skilled and educated workforce is necessary for them to succeed in today's environment. So this combination of data analytics and talent strategies really has put the spotlight on talent analytics. And even though we've been talking about this really for a few years now, there's much more demand from the C-suite for more sophisticated analytics coming out of the talent organization. So with regard to that, it's not only predictive, or it's not just reporting or predictive analytics, but prescriptive analytics that really seem to matter. Yet in this survey from Deloitte, HR leaders themselves said that their analytics capabilities just haven't matured very quickly. Yet only 35% of them say that they are under active development. So I found this result to be very interesting, because if it has such a high priority, why are there not more of the HR leaders working on developing these skills? So, and again, think of the organization as a whole. Think of your own organization, and there's most likely some sophisticated analytics occurring in different aspects of your organization. Perhaps it's in identifying consumer needs, in running logistics and operations, the advancement of analytics in finance, and a very rapid change over the last few years. So as other areas of the organization have changed and become more sophisticated and are providing that type of very insightful information to the C-suite, HR instead has been lagging behind, and now they're being asked to really catch up to their peers in the organization. So what does that really mean to you? This model may be familiar to you. This is from Gardner, but a very widely used way to describe how an organization progresses along that journey of data analytics, because it's not very often that you can just sort of jump in right at the predictive level or the prescriptive level. There are often steps that you need to take in order to move up to that more complex level. So let me just take a moment and just to lay the groundwork, because we're going to come back to this model a couple of times during our webinar today, and just make sure that we're all grounded in what we mean by these 4 levels of analytics. So descriptive analytics, think of this as reporting, and I suspect that most of you are doing descriptive analytics today. Descriptive analytics tells you what has happened. So this is, just finding out, looking in the rearview mirror essentially, and determining what you have already done, and trying to make some speculation on why that has happened. But then once you start asking the question of why, or adding other factors into your analysis, you start moving into this diagnostic level. So diagnostic analytics, I like to think of these as really the level where you are starting to use dashboards, perhaps visualization tools. You're starting to combine at least 2 factors together. So you're looking at, let's say, retention over time, or retention across different divisions. You may be comparing recruiting efficiency based on different types of jobs. So you start introducing various factors and looking for patterns and forming some hypotheses, again, about why it's happened. But at the diagnostic level, you are still looking to the past and the current state and past information. You really can't determine the true cause. You're just making hypotheses about the cause. So the big leap really occurs to the next level, to the predictive analytics level. And this is where more sophisticated tools usually come into play. And the reason is that you are trying to look into the future. So at this point, you're asking questions about what will happen, and what are those factors that can help us determine what will happen and will help us to make more informed decisions today to improve the probability that we will have a stronger outcome in the future. And so the next level, prescriptive analytics, is taking those predictive results and putting them into action. So now we know what scenarios may lead to the best outcome. How can we actually make that happen? What steps will we take from a talent perspective? What decisions will we make? What investments will we make in order to, again, improve the probability that we'll get that positive result? So I'm going to pause here for just a minute and ask you all our first polling question, and we'll have a couple of these today. And the first polling question asks, what level of talent analytics is your organization doing today? So we'll give you a few seconds to answer. And again, just as a reminder, so that descriptive level, that's really reporting, basic reporting. Diagnostic level, you're getting into a little bit more advanced reporting and looking at correlations, why did something happen, what factors might be related to each other to help us give us some insight into the situation. Predictive, though, is looking into what will happen in the future and using more causal analysis, scenarios, so forth. And then prescriptive is the highest level, where you're putting it into action and really making those talent decisions based on that data. So everyone, just please respond to which level you are at now. We'll just give you a few more seconds. All right. So it looks like our results for our group today are primarily around the descriptive and the diagnostic level of analysis. And this is actually not very surprising. And so we have, you know, the majority of you are at this level, and we have a few that are at the predictive level and maybe one or two at the prescriptive level. So this, I've asked this question of many different types of audiences in the last year and actually get very similar results. But I would actually, instead of, and these are, actually these results are not ones that I've compiled on this screen. This is from various other sources, and you may actually see this is from 2014, 2012. There was some new information out recently by Burson where this upper level is moving more towards 10% instead of 4%, which is good news. But I'd like your takeaway from this to be not, oh, well, goodness, I'm in good company, but instead, why are we after 4 years, these numbers really haven't changed? Why are we still, as an HR profession, still at this level? So, and that was a question that we were asking as well at Cornerstone, because we have tools that our clients can use at that predictive and prescriptive level, but we found so many people were just not ready for those yet. And so that's what we want to share with you today. I want to share with you today is what are those barriers that are standing in the way? Now, of course, there could be many barriers, but time and time again, these are the ones that that we hear from our clients and that I hear from people just in speaking at different events. So moving from that descriptive to that diagnostic level, most HR leaders, organizations are really struggling with not only data integrity, but data integration as well. And they get stuck at that point of, I don't have the data I need, or the data I need isn't clean, or my data sits in various systems and I don't own all of it. So it's very difficult for me to answer important questions if I can't get access to that data. And we're going to come back to each one of these barriers in greater detail. The second barrier is the lack of analytics capabilities. So remember, this is really the biggest leap between diagnostic and predictive. And again, most commonly what I hear from CHROs is the question of how do I build the analytics capabilities in my team, or how do I build an analytics team even? Do I need an internal analytics team? Because having the data and even having the tools and technology, often what happens is there's investment in more sophisticated predictive tools at this level, but if you don't have the ability to interpret those results and communicate those results to your business leaders, then you're really not capitalizing on the value of those predictive analytics results. And then finally at the prescriptive level, the greatest barrier that we see is weak business alignment. And what we mean by that is that at that prescriptive level, really the people who have to take action, remember that's what prescriptive is all about, are usually your line managers, your frontline managers, the ones who are leading people, managing people. And so the adoption and the acceptance of the results sometimes can be a challenge. They may question the results, especially if it's very different from their beliefs, or if they feel like they didn't have a part in compiling the recommendation. And so it's very important that whatever those recommendations are, whatever action is being taken or investments are being made, that there's a direct tie back to the business. So keep these barriers in mind, and we will, like I said, come back to them in just a minute. I wanted to share a quick example with you of one of my experiences with a particular client, and that client is Xerox, and how they made the steps into that predictive and prescriptive level of analytics. So in this organization, it was within their call center part of their organization, they were seeing decreased retention and decreased productivity among their call center representatives. And they had some ideas about what may be causing that, but they wanted to be very clear if they were going to make changes or make decisions about how to improve retention and improve productivity. They wanted to make sure they just weren't throwing darts at the wall, that they were really making targeted decisions. So they did some additional analysis in partnership with Cornerstone, and factors were incorporated to see what will actually make the biggest difference, what makes the biggest difference now, and if you change these elements, that will make the biggest difference in the future. And what they found is that overtime was key to retention, and that for hourly workers, that having that overtime was important to for them, particularly because they were making less compensation. Well, taking that recommendation, if you stopped here, taking that recommendation to senior leaders, you can imagine would be faced with a lot of resistance, because overtime, immediately they think of the money that is going to be required. And so there needed to be a much more specific type of analysis done. Is there a certain amount of overtime that is important? And the answer was in fact that yes, they needed, sorry, going the wrong direction. It was only 1 to 3 hours of overtime. And with 1 to 3 hours of overtime, they were able to significantly improve retention and tenure of those call center employees. Well, 1 to 3 hours of overtime was a little bit easier to swallow for the executives from a financial perspective. It would require, of course, greater management of that time by the call center managers, but they realized that that just that small change, if it was going to make that much difference in their retention, it was certainly worth making that change. So just one example of how, had they stopped at the descriptive and diagnostic level, or even had not looked at various factors at the predictive level, they could have gone in the wrong direction. So before, really before you go down this road, you have to start by knowing where to focus. So before I get to those barriers, I want to talk about really the starting point. So we really didn't talk about that far left side of the maturity model, but knowing where to start is important. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions back to back, and we're going to start with this one. I want you to think about what is a top priority for your C-level executives. Is it organic and inorganic growth, driving improvement in critical metrics? Is it expanding in new products and or service lines, focus on or improving your culture, or improving operational efficiencies and facilities, so your operational parts of your business? And as you think about these, and we're asking you to choose just one, although you may feel like you could choose more than one, these would be the top priorities that you hear in those quarterly results, or the quarterly addresses that your CEO is making to the company and to stockholders. It could be just what is the top priority in terms of the goals of the organization for the year. So go ahead and take a few minutes to respond. What is it that is top priority for your C-level executives? And we'll just give you another couple seconds. Okay. So it looks like we had a slightly more of you said driving improvement in critical metrics is a top priority. Also, organic and inorganic growth is important. And then the last three are pretty close for product and service line expansion, the culture, and operations. So let's keep that in mind. I'm going to ask you a second question. So for this one, I want you to think of your talent challenges and those that are top priority for you in your HR organization. So slightly different. And again, we're going to ask you to choose one, even though that might be challenging. But what is your key priority, a top priority for you right now? Availability of critical talent, building a strong leadership pipeline, is it retaining key talent, improving employee engagement, maximizing employee productivity? And again, just choose one that you feel is top of the list. That's what you're most likely spending the majority of your time on. It's high priority on your goals, your team's goals, your CHRO's goals. All right, so we'll just give you a second. All right. So it looks like, again, we have most of you saying building a strong leadership pipeline, which also I do see a lot. It's certainly something that is, again, a very commonly discussed topic in the HR industry. We also have retaining key talent, very important, and I imagine in many ways those two are related. If you're building a strong leadership pipeline, you also want to be retaining key talent so that development is really making the best investment in your organization. Availability of critical talent, looks like that and engagement are pretty close, and then maximizing employee productivity. So the reason why I ask you this is because, this is, and as I mentioned in the poll, I restricted you guys to just pick one, but perhaps you felt like you could pick two. And often from a talent perspective, we feel like we can't say no to anything, and everything is related to those business priorities. So if if driving improvement in critical metrics was your top priority, you could be working on many different things from a talent perspective: availability of critical talent, building a strong leadership pipeline, and retaining key talent. Those would all be related. And it's difficult and can be overwhelming when there's so many different things coming at you. This isn't uncommon, but when you are thinking about what you want to accomplish from an analytics perspective, and you're really just starting out and trying to move from that descriptive and diagnostic level to the predictive level, it's extremely important that you know where you should be focusing, because it can get very overwhelming as well from a data perspective if you are not either A, focused on the right business question that you're trying to answer, or B, trying to tackle multiple challenges from a talent management perspective. So these aren't necessarily, I'm not trying to say these are the only alignments, but the point here and the takeaway here is know where to focus. Make sure that when you are really trying to move the dial on your analytics capabilities, that you don't overwhelm yourself. Pick one, and it should be a top business priority. It has to be important to your business executives in order for the data to be meaningful to them, for them to want to listen to what you have to say, and also to keep asking for more. So we'll get to that in a second, but keep this in mind. Focus. It always has to start with the business question. Make sure that you are working on something that's important to the business. And I want to spend the next few minutes just giving you some examples of what this may look like. So let me go back just a second. So the business priorities on the left, talent priorities on the right. Often, people can get confused with, well, what does this look like at each level of the analytics maturity? So, aren't I doing enough by creating dashboards or being able to have interactive, visualization tools? And again, that's a great start. It's a good way to, and it's the step that you have to pass through before you may get to something more sophisticated. But I'm going to give you a few examples here of those talent challenges. And again, you can, each of you identified with slightly different ones. And so hopefully this will resonate with you of, oh, this is what it looks like if we move from these more operational types of analytics, which are descriptive diagnostic, and we move to the predictive and prescriptive. So, so I'll just go through these very quickly. There's one for each of the talent challenges. So this one was maximizing employee productivity, and these are examples based with our real companies, real clients. So in this case, the company saw declining employee productivity, particularly among new hires. In other words, people were not getting up to speed fast enough. And so they could see that in their reports, and then started asking questions and looking at different factors that may be contributing to that that lack of productivity, not reaching productivity in the required amount of time. What they found was that their new hires were spending a lot of time in training courses, getting up to speed, onboarding, and so forth. But actually, a lot of those courses were not completed. There was a lot of pressure for them to, of course, be productive, hit the ground running, that kind of thing. But they just couldn't get there because also they weren't completing their training. So further analysis really narrowed in at the predictive level of which of those courses, which of those learning experiences on the job training was really contributing to performance and productivity. So using a more causal model and looking at, these factors are critical for people to be productive, and these are the nice to haves. And so that allowed then the organization to go to the next step, which is let's change things and let's make sure that our new hires are getting the most essential training experiences that they need, and the less essential ones can wait. So those, once they reach that level of proficiency and productivity, then we can introduce the nice-to-haves later on, instead of it taking up their time early on, or perhaps it was content that just didn't make sense to them quite yet as new hires. So, so that's what they did, and they made those changes to the new hire curriculum, and they saw productivity increase. Retaining key talent may have been very important to some of you, and so in this organization, they were seeing some attrition higher than they would have preferred of their key talent. And again, you can see that through your report. So you're looking at retention reports, but you may be cross-referencing that with people who are high potential or maybe on succession plans and so forth. So they started digging into a little bit deeper. Also, what happens a lot at the diagnostic level is you start, of course, just having conversations, interviewing, talking to executives, maybe even having focus groups, and you start again hypothesizing about what might be going on. In this case, they found there were some factors like the tenure of the individual and the division that they worked in that seemed to be driving greater attrition, and so that's what they wanted to narrow in on. Getting to the predictive level, though, meant that not because you can look at more information in a more sophisticated model, meant that they didn't have to limit themselves to tenure and division. And instead, by putting in multiple factors into the model, they were able to identify additional potential flight risks on more than just tenure and division. And the way they use that information is by running that scenario. They could see that there may be people at risk that they had no one knew that they could be at risk. So again, it's sometimes can be tricky if you're looking at individual level data, what action you can take, but certainly collectively there is action that you can take if you see in a particular area there's a higher percentage of people who are flight risk than in other areas. And so they were able to use that information and again take action, recommend specific actions to mitigate that risk and impact. And again, if they had stayed down at the diagnostic level, they really would have just been guessing, so really, as to what was going on. All right, availability of critical talent is another one, and this is typically we think of as mainly looking outside your organization for talent, and in this particular case, the organization was having difficulty filling critical roles externally. And what was happening is, so the recruiters felt like they were identifying the right people, but those candidates were really not making it to the interview stage or not receiving an offer. So there was a disconnect there. And so they did conclude there's some lack of clarity of skills. What do the managers really have agreement on what they need for these particular roles? And again, had conversations with the managers. Then they took that to the next level, and they could have stopped there and certainly just made sure the recruiters were sourcing people the right way. But in this case, they took that to the next level and said, we feel like we can leverage a predictive tool. In this case, it would be a selection assessment, because if we can identify and measure those skills related to high performers in the job and use that to measure the probability of success of applicants, then we will have a much stronger selection process, more accurate selection process, and more alignment. In order to even put that test in place, you have to have alignment with what the business is looking for. So that's what they did. They, of course, first had clarity and agreement on what was necessary, then incorporated that into a tool and used that predictive tool in their hiring process. And that helped to improve that that ratio of candidates who are being, of course, interviewed and offered jobs, and ultimately higher success on the job. Employee engagement. This was a situation, again, at the descriptive and diagnostic level. Well, what they were seeing is a decline in employee engagement. Of course, we all know from an engagement perspective, there can be many things driving engagement. In this particular case, there was clear indication that employees didn't feel like they had development opportunities or career mobility. And so that was a key factor that they determined based on the survey results, which again are typically diagnostic of what might be happening. But this company took it a bit further in terms of how they responded to that feedback. So they wanted to use a predictive model that showed where people had moved previously in the organization, so drawing on historical data, but modeling it out into the most likely career paths for advancement. And of course, there's always outliers. People go down different roads, but they could use all that data about how people have moved through the organization to communicate to their current employees that this is a possible career path, and here's the type of training, development, other experiences that will help to get you there. So that's exactly what happened. It was translated into development plans and career mobility recommendations to ultimately address that factor that was lowering engagement. And then the last one, last but not least, because most of you said this was important to you, I didn't intentionally leave it for last, but is building that leadership pipeline. And to be honest with you, from an analytics perspective, from a predictive analytics perspective, this is the one that I feel like is both the most intriguing and probably the most difficult, mainly because for when you think of particularly succession plans and succession planning at the top of the house, there is a degree of sort of pride and desire to have a lot of discretion in those decisions. And so introducing objective data that may introduce something that those executives had not thought of before can be a bit risky, but can also be very, very powerful. So in this case, the organization saw a lack of leadership candidates. Again, you can run that on a report. If you're looking at the viability of your succession plans, pretty straightforward to do. But they were seeing a lack of succession candidates. And so they started digging a little bit deeper, asking questions, and they concluded that there was a competency and capability gap across that next level of the organization. In other words, people were not seen as ready now. Their readiness was, 1, 3, or 5 years out, and so that was leading to the lack of candidates. In a predictive succession, what you can do is, again, similar to what we said of availability of critical talent, which actually has some similarities here, is identifying there's some work you have to do first to say what are those factors that contribute to success in these leadership roles. And once you identify those factors, and you can either do it, again, using your data by mining your data, you also want to, that's the more objective way, or you can bring in, again, subjective information. This is where art and science kind of come together, and you identify what those key factors are. The really neat thing about doing predictive succession is then you can apply that model across your whole organization. And so now you're able to identify people who may not be as visible, maybe in a different location than headquarters, so not as many of the execs know who they are, or perhaps they just, they're relatively new to the organization, so their track record isn't as well known yet. And by casting that broader net, now you have the opportunity to identify people who could be potential successors, and assuming that that's the direction they want to go as well, creating those development plans or including them in development programs to reach those leadership levels. So again, you can be much more data-driven and objective, again, balancing that with the qualitative information that often comes into that kind of process, succession process, and sharing that with leaders in a way where they really feel like they're informed, and then they're coming away with a much stronger decision about identifying leadership candidates. All right, so that's lots of examples for you. So hopefully that's helpful and kind of grounds you in the different levels of analytics. But so let's say at this point you know where you have to go. You know which business priority you need to focus on, what talent challenge is top of mind, and now we're going to come back to our barriers, because again, data, capabilities, and alignment with the business are what can hold you back. So let's talk about each of these at a time. So first, the data and integrity, data integrity integration piece. So many of you said that you were at that descriptive and diagnostic level, and often at that level, hopefully this resonates with you, you're very, very focused on the data. I have also spoken to people who've said, well, I have this data, and so what can I do with it? And so first of all, we just spent quite a bit of time talking about don't start with the data, start with the business question in mind. And so if you really do start with the business question in mind, I think that you'll find that you can identify very quickly what data you need, and it may not be as much data Often people get stuck here because they are waiting for, the to buy that new visualization tool, or when's the data warehouse going to be available, or we don't trust our data, it has to be cleaned up, and so I need someone who can go through it and tell me what needs to change or how we can filter it, and you get stuck there, and no analysis gets done. So my recommendation to you, well, that's important, having data integrity, and also it is very true that the more integrated your data is, the more sophisticated your analysis will be. But start somewhere. Choose a place to start. Most of the data that you probably need to answer those important questions are most likely already in HR. And then you may want or need one or two other factors. Let's say maybe you're looking at impact on costs, training costs, or costs for hire. So you want some financial data. Or perhaps the burning question is if the company is expanding into new products and services, then sales and revenue are going to be important. So where do you get that data? So the majority of the data is probably something you in HR and talent management can get your hands on, and then you're going to have to reach out for those one or two other things. But don't become overwhelmed and think that you can't move forward until you have it all. And what you'll find too is, because sometimes that involves, or oftentimes involves, additional investment in technology or services from your own technology group or outside technology groups. If you start somewhere and you demonstrate some really compelling results with your analysis, then that demand will continue to grow and that investment will continue to grow. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good, I like to think. The second barrier that we talked about was having the analytics capabilities. And again, this is a very common question. How do I, or really usually the first question I hear is, how do I build an analytics team? So I don't want you to walk away today and say, Jennifer told me I should hire 4 people in these 4 little boxes to have on our analytics team. These are roles that over time that we have found, and this is also a result of a conversation that we had with Josh Burson as well, but found that are important to move forward. And before I talk about the roles, here's a couple things I would like you to, again, here's a takeaway for you. They do not all have to be on your team. You do not have to have all these people in HR. First of all, you may have people who are already on your team who have these skills. And I'm not going to take, obviously the CHRO is in the middle there, and the change agent, I really encourage everyone has to be a change agent to some degree. But the other roles, you may have people already on your team who have some of these skills, but you're not utilizing them that way. The other option that you can have, especially in the interim, before you can dedicate resources to this, is that they most likely exist somewhere else in your organization. As we mentioned, as I mentioned at the very top of the hour, these are your company most likely is already doing predictive analytics somewhere, whether it's marketing, whether it's your operations group, your finance group, logistics. There are people doing predictive analytics in your organization, and you need to see if you can find them. I had one colleague who, again, could not really, justify building a team, but instead just started looking through the organization for people with the title of analyst, and invited them to just a informal meeting to see what they did. Now it can be a little bit deceiving. We call people analysts in many different ways, but eventually it resulted in this cohort within their organization of people who were doing analytics, and they were able to meet on, just like a monthly or quarterly basis, virtually or in person, and share the projects they were working on, the challenges they were having. And what she was able to find was people she could borrow and say, hey, we have the same issue. Do you think you can come look at what we're trying to do and help us out? And so that's one way to do it. And of course, the third way is to look for a partner who can help you in this respect too, an external partner. So again, these are 4 key roles. I'll start at the bottom. A data architect is someone who probably sounds pretty familiar, someone who's really going to integrate that data, get it in the form that you need, and help to align that data with outcomes. The workforce scientist is what you might typically call a data scientist, and those data scientists, the demand for data scientists has grown exponentially over the last just 5 years. But this is someone who typically is a statistical expert as well as a data expert, and they really understand that advanced analysis and are experts in some of the more sophisticated predictive modeling techniques and technology. The workforce behavior expert, think of this as more perhaps an organizational psychologist. So this is someone who can lend their expertise into what are we measuring, and are we measuring it correctly? What are the relationships we would expect? And so coming at it from that perspective. And as I mentioned, a change agent, we could probably talk all day about really that analytics mindset in the organization, but at some point, and I'm actually going to get there at the next slide, is everyone needs to be a change agent and be comfortable sharing the results of your analysis with their business execs. So it should not necessarily be a center of expertise in your team. That might be where some of the hard work takes place, but really all those HR partners should feel comfortable communicating and telling the story about what the results mean. And that's really where we'll go next, which is if you were going to move successfully from predictive to prescriptive analytics, remember you have to have that change in adoption. If you started with the business need, the business priority, this should not be a problem when you get to this stage, because remember, we said your C-suite is looking for that type of analytics. They're already seeing it throughout their organization. They want to see it from a people perspective as well. And if you've grounded your analysis in solving an important business question or business problem, then that will resonate as well with the leaders who have to be the ones to take the action that's resulting from the analysis. The picture on here is a little deceiving because kind of intentionally, don't ever go into a meeting with charts and graphs. This is also where, and again, the change agent piece comes into play too. And it's not easy for this to happen, but you have to become a storyteller. So I've heard time and time again, companies that are doing this as well will say, look, we spent a month gathering the data and a month analyzing the data, and then I brought to the meeting, so they had just reams and reams of sort of results and all kinds of numbers, but they bring to the meeting with executives one slide. So, and they keep all that other information in their back pocket. So think about what story you're telling with the data rather than plopping the data on the table and leaving it up to them to interpret. That's the expertise that you bring to the table. So I'm going to wrap it up with just some takeaways, and then we're happy to answer any questions that you all have. But today, really, I would love for you to walk away with these few takeaways. First, that, of course, that's one reason why you joined us today, is that talent analytics is very much top of mind, but it's only going to be as impactful as the business decisions you address. So that's a very important thing to remember. Prescriptive analytics is truly transforming the way we do business, manage talent, and bring the results. And then those barriers that we talked about, the data, the capabilities, change and adoption, those are at a minimum the areas that you should expect that you're going to have to address to move through that journey to more predictive and prescriptive analytics. And of course, the technology does exist today for you to do that. So it's not, and of course this is, at Cornerstone we have different types of analytics, but there are lots of options out there today, which is really, really exciting that there are so many choices, but at the same time, a tool is only as good as the people who are using it and your readiness to take those results and turn them into very impactful talent decisions and changes in your organization. So I will be happy to answer any questions, and Jake, I'll turn it to you.
Hi Jennifer, yeah, we do have one here actually. It says, I can't seem to get buy-in from my executives to make an investment in analytics technology. How do I make that case?
Yeah, I actually have also had people who have said, my executives just want me to give them the data and just send them the report after report after report, and I can't seem to get past that. And so this goes back to the start somewhere, and in some ways I'll ask you to be a little to take that risk of, if you can use, if what's keeping those executives up at night, and you're able to do some analysis that sheds a little bit different perspective on the situation and share that with them. Sometimes it's unexpectedly, they may not have asked for it, but if you have a compelling, again, story to tell or information to share, that's where the interest starts, and then there will be greater demand. But a really big part of that is establishing yourself as a trusted advisor to that executive as well. And again, I'm just using one example where someone said, I don't want to send them reports anymore. I want to be able to share, results and insights with them. And it's like many things. You have to take it one step at a time, but make sure you're addressing something that's really critical for them, and then usually you can make that case for more investment.
We have another one here. This is from Pinky. They've asked, what are the different statistical tools that can be used to analyze the retention data?
For really the statistical tools can be used for just about anything, but there's a variety of things out there. It depends on, again, how sophisticated you want to get. So it can be as straightforward as statistical analysis packages like SPSS or Stata or R is a very common one now. As you get into more sophisticated type of analysis, there's things like Hadoop that can handle a ton of data. If I was approaching the retention question, which actually is one of the most common areas for people to start in terms of their analytics, because it also is usually something that's pretty obvious to your execs, where is this good good attrition, bad attrition, what's happening to our people, and that usually can be done with you don't have to get too sophisticated. As you get into more statistical models where you have a lot of data, it depends on how much data you want to put in. So if you already can start with some hypotheses about what might be driving your retention, you can use different regression analysis to test out those theories and see what the, which factors are really contributing the most to that retention. So yeah, again, like I said, I always prefer to sort of start simple, and then and then go from there. If it's a more complicated question, and sometimes retention can be complicated, but see what you get with sort of basic statistical models, and then go from there if that's not making a difference.
Cool. We've got another one, this time from James. He's asked, or he said, we found that highlighting the gaps in our leadership pipeline to our senior board had an impact when they could see the lack of ready now successors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it absolutely does. And James, that's interesting. I'm curious as to how you did it. I'll share with you just a really quick story. When I was relatively new to my last organization, a transportation organization, and I saw I had to do their executive succession planning, and I looked at the plan, and I thought, well, this is not really a viable plan. We have a dozen people who are on multiple plans, and also we have many people who are close to retirement because it was a much more senior workforce. But I tried to think of how to communicate that to our senior leaders. And even though I had done, this is one example of how I did a ton of analysis leading up to that meeting, because I wanted to be able to, of course, say, well, what level of readiness do we have, and, where do we have our gaps and so forth. But I wanted to grab their attention. I knew that their reaction would be, they were very proud of their succession plan, and so I didn't want to offend them. So I took a slide and I put everybody's name up on the slide that was a current succession candidate, and then I took away all the names that either were within 2 years of retirement or who were on more than 2 succession plans, because you can't, once you're chosen for one, you can't really be available for any more. And about 60% of the names were gone. So it was a visual way to make an impact, and they were shocked. And so then we got into the data. But sometimes, I knew if I just talked to them or just gave them numbers, that I would be met with a lot of resistance. So I opted for picture tells 1,000 words sometimes, and I got their attention. So yeah, it can be very insightful, but yeah, they have to trust the data too. So you have to be prepared for them to question it.
James did get back to me. He said we used a very simple 9-box model with capability and behaviours as the 2-axis. Only top right were ready now. We then segmented the remaining individuals into what timescale they'd be ready in, or not ever ready, as the case may be.
Yeah, that's great. So you could, again, use that 9-box as a visual. That usually is very compelling. So good. That's a great example.
We have another question from Mohammed. What is the difference between interpretation of number and the predictive analytics?
When you're at the if I understand your question correctly, Mohammed, that at the diagnostic level, you have the numbers, but you're interpreting them based on your own experience or the other input that you are gathering. What the predictive models allow you to do is you're putting in a lot of factors, and the tool itself or the model itself is giving you a result. You do have to be careful, because you certainly can influence that model, but ideally you want to kind of start without influencing it and say, what if I think that people in the north, region are less likely to stay, but you run the analysis in a predictive model, and it's not that it's the north region, it's just that there's higher tenure people in the north region, so you kind of have a confounding effect. So that's the difference with predictive models, is you're letting the model do some of that interpretation for you. You still have to take the results and make sense of it, but it's taking some of that bias out of the process. And usually revealing something, ideally revealing something to you that you hadn't thought of before.
Cool. We've got one more question from Will Powell. He asks, for what sort of size business is it worth using more complex analytical tools? So, for example, a business that only has 30 leavers per month, is it worth using complex tools to analyze turnover?
I'm sorry, what size organization did you say, Jay?
Oh, it only has about 30 leavers per month.
Oh, okay. I'm a little biased because I think some more sophisticated analysis, it provides insight regardless of the size of the organization, yet at the same time you have to balance that with the resources that you need to do that. So the key, I think, in terms of size of the organization, it's, I think, less about the size and more about, because with the 30 people leaving, you would have to look across a longer period of time in order to find more meaningful patterns. So that can be the challenge of, but again, if the business says, well, we're rapidly growing, so this is, perhaps a good scenario of, if we're rapidly growing, and yes, we only have 500 people today, but we think in 2 years we may have 5,000 employees, then that predictive analytics is really important to them, because they want to look into the future and make plans for how do we get there. If you have an organization that's more stable and it's a smaller organization, there still may be insights, though, that the predictive analysis could inform you on, but it may, ideally, to do the predictive analytics, you would want more data is better, let's put it that way. So you just would have to look over a longer period of time before you could really make any conclusions.
Cool, thank you, Jennifer. I think that's all the questions we have time for today. So yeah, thank you, Jennifer, and also thank you everyone that attended. Just a reminder.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Cool. And just one final reminder, this will be uploaded onto HR Grapevine's YouTube channel very shortly. Thank you.
All right, have a great day.